Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go on and get us started because it's about 10:20 now. Some of you know we've had a big morning already, and fortunately, our dear friend is going to be fine. But we're going to go with the flow today. I hear that they are having a challenging time down at those of some of my fellow clergy and some of the chapter, not all the chapter, have retreated to Callaway Gardens this weekend, where I learned early this morning, apparently they are without power, without food, and showers and everything. So they are also having, these are the times that try people's souls, right? But together we are strong, and I'll tell you, when we were going through the emergency, I felt once again the incredible strength and faithfulness and love and hope and support of this community. And we are fortunate indeed in these trying times to be part of this community. Not everyone has that. And so I am grateful for all of you. Today we combine our old-fashioned Sunday school class with our living faith class, and I think it's really fortuitous because we are just beginning a new book that we're going to be studying really for the rest of this program year, I suspect, in the living faith class. It's a book that we had a presentation, not specifically about this book, but Teddy Bear, some of you know, a parishioner of ours, and one of the counselors from my daughter Margaret's school, Trinity School, Carly Rice, came and talked about anxiety in children and what seems to be the proliferation of that across our society. And so they drew some upon this book. And some, out of curiosity, how many of you have read or know about Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation? Yes, I know some area schools have had programs. It really is a wonderful book. We've got it in the bookstore, or if we've run out, we're getting more in stock. There are aspects of it that are pretty technical. There are a lot of charts and so forth. If you're into that, great. If not, don't be put off, because it's also a good narrative read in many ways. And it's also, I want to hasten to add, I think it is not simply a book for parents, grandparents, teachers, others who have ongoing regular relationships or concern about children, though it's wonderful for that. It addresses many of the challenges that we're facing in society as a whole right now. And if you're like me, I am a parent of a teenager and a preteen, but even if you are not a parent of children, I think you will find lots of value and lots of food for thought in this book. And my hope is that, based on the conversations we have in our living faith class, that we will, as a parish community, have more and more of these conversations around issues of mental health, and particularly because there's a lot that is playing into our current mental health crisis in this country and around the world. But particularly, Haidt's focus is on how the internet and iPhones and social media, video game, all sorts of the digital world plays into that and contributes to that, he thinks. So I am eager for us to have conversations about this topic as a parish as a whole. So welcome, and I'm glad you're here. Jonathan Haidt is the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. He's a social psychologist, not a clinical psychologist or a media studies scholar. He's very clear on that. And his work on this book, The Anxious Mind, subtitle, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. His work on this book is a direct continuation of the themes that he explored in one of his prior books, called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he has, I haven't read anything on it yet, but apparently he has a good column called After Babel that you can connect with on Substack. Before I dive into a preview, sort of an introduction to Haidt's book, I want to say just a few words about the crisis in which we clearly do find ourselves getting deeper and deeper each year, and that's the crisis of mental health among young people, and particularly among those born after 1995. I'm sure you're aware that we have a general mental health crisis here in the United States that spans, as I said, all age groups, and that we are woefully unprepared to deal with it. And this has been building up for a long, long time due to a radical shortage of providers. If you've ever tried to get yourself or a family member in to see, a regular therapist, to talk about a relationship, or perhaps just your desire to grow, or perhaps you're dealing with some depression, it can take a long, long time to get in with someone. So we have a shortage of providers, we have a shortage of treatment centers, we have a, excuse me, a shortage of funding, and we're in a bad spot when even those of us who have the means to pay for our own treatment or have good insurance plans that cover it still can't always get access to what we need. You can imagine the crisis for those who are underinsured or uninsured and who do not have the resources that many of us do. So, but what Haidt's book focuses on, and what I'd like to offer you just a few statistics about, is this absolute explosion of mental health challenges among what's often termed Generation Z, those born after 1995. This is the group that Haidt terms the anxious generation. Some of you know, who have younger children, know there's now what's often called Generation Alpha, but Haidt hastens to add, sadly, that he feels like Generation Alpha will come in with Generation Z and be the anxious generation. He talks some in this book. It's interesting. He reflects on the work of a psychologist who has challenged the long-held idea that what differentiates generations, besides different dates, is really sort of their life experiences, particularly world experiences, things like wars or pandemics, that is often the way we as a society and sociologists and historians have lumped together and separated the different generations. But this one particular psychologist, and I should have written down her name, but recently did a study, and she wants to suggest that it's not only shared experiences and events, but it's also how different generations interact with different forms of media. So whether it was radio way back when, and TV with boomers, and the beginnings of video gaming with Gen X, to now Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who are often learning to swipe to get into the iPhone before they're two. So this book is focused on the anxious generation, people born after 1995. Some statistics about the mental health of this generation, statistics that sadly I know some of us here can offer anecdotal evidence about as well, are in 2010, which was when Haidt wants to, that's sort of ground zero for Haidt, 2010, when the earliest stage of Gen Z were sort of coming of age, and that happened to coincide with, if you remember, an explosion of pretty much everyone getting a smartphone at that point. 2009, the year before, you may recall that Facebook and some other social media groups and platforms existed before 2009, but 2009, I believe, was the year when the like and the retweet and the share function became available, so that prior to that, people were using Facebook mostly to post pictures of their trips or animals or their children. But before 2009, people were not coming online and saying, oh yeah, like, or love, or share. Look what so-and-so did for their spring break. And so that year really upped the ante in terms of what social media has now become. Not just a platform for reconnecting with old friends or for sharing pictures with family members, but in many ways for, and not saying this is always the intent, but it is received, particularly by so many young people, as an opportunity to brand oneself, as the platform that they must use to present themselves to the world and to their peers the way they want to be presented. So Haidt in his research has found that after that, in 2009, 2010 was really when things changed, he says, rather suddenly. So he has some statistics. From 2010 to 2020, reported major depressive episodes among teens, both boys and girls, increased by 150%. By 2020, 1 in every 4 teenage girls had experienced a major depressive episode in the prior 12 months. Think of that. 1 in 4 teenage girls by 2020 could say that they had experienced a major depressive episode sometime over the prior 12 months. And in terms of mental illness among adolescents in general, there was an enormous surge around this time between the years 2010 and 2020 in what the psychiatric field often refers to as internalizing disorders. That is where the person suffering distress suffers this distress internally, depression, anxiety, within himself or herself. This is opposed to externalizing disorders where sufferers may have trouble with anger management, with relationships with others, they may be violent or engage in excessive risk-taking. So those are some statistics. There is no denying that there is just an explosion among people born since the year 1995, people who Haidt goes on in this book to refer to as, rather than the play-based children, that's not the word, I'll call it to mind, but children who, instead of, as with prior generations, spent a lot of their earlier years playing outside or engaging in imaginary play, children whose interactions and whose play has been largely phone oriented. And he wants to hasten to add, he doesn't just mean a smartphone, because I know a lot of us may not give our kids a smartphone until they're older. He uses the sort of the phone culture as a general expression for all the digital forums that we have out there. So there's just been this huge surge. I'm going to stop here for a minute, first of all, to rest my voice. It's a big day and I'm coming off. I'm fine, but I had the flu for 10 days and my voice is still a little icky. So I'd love to hear any feedback or questions, or what can you add? What are you seeing? Those of you who have children, grandchildren, or what do you read in the news? Do you see evidence of this explosion in mental health challenges among people born since 1995, especially in younger people? Yes, Sally. Yes, amen to that. My children's schools are both doing that. And did everybody hear that? That a lot of schools now, including some here in Atlanta, have either said that the children have to lock their phones in their lockers during school hours and they can get them afterwards, or they may even have a special place where they turn them in and they're kept for them throughout the day. And this is something that, that Jonathan Haidt, this is not a guy here. This is one of the things I love about this book. This is not just a complaining, oh, whoa, it's all terrible sort of a book. He gives some wonderful advice, and I'm going to go over a little bit of that in just a few minutes, talking about some ideas for families and for communities to implement. He is big. Jonathan Haidt, this is another reason we're studying this book, he is big on the idea that communities like faith communities can be places where parents, grandparents, other concerned people can come together and form sort of a, I hate to call it a bubble because I hope it'll spread, but form a community of support, because we all know, right, from our own teen years, how awful it feels to be and how hard it is when we feel like we're the only one whose parents are putting down this law. So he really encourages communities to gather together and to establish some norms and to form sort of accountability and support groups. Yes?
Yeah, I think that certainly the smartphones accept play a large part of this. However, I think there's been a evolution, sociological evolution, from delayed gratification to instant gratification. And I think that is important. Kids now, it's a matter of, I've got to have it now.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it from the standpoint of photography and pictures. They take the picture, it's right in front of them. Anything they want, they get now. And that joy of delayed gratification, I can wait. There's more joy in it. I think that's gone, but I think it preceded the cell phone. I think it's an evolutionary process that we're no longer
Right, right. I mean, as soon as photographs started going digital, that's a great example. I mean, I was just down in my hometown in Mississippi after Christmas and pointed out to my children yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, just the point that yes, smartphones may be a piece of it. Oh, and if you'll raise your hand if you want to speak, Brant's got the microphone.
Just raise your hand and I'll come give you the mic. Just give me a second.
Thank you. But the issue being raised that of delayed gratification, which of course smartphones and digital products all play into that, including in your wonderful point about how some of us remember, anyway, so I was down in Mississippi and pointed to my children. I said, oh gosh, there's the photo processing center. I spent so many happy hours going through the drive-through line, waiting to get my pictures and wondering what they were going to look like, and did I look as good as I thought I did at the dance, and I can't wait to show my friends and that was something that one looked forward to. And so again, yeah, I think, and Jonathan Haidt, in fact, I want us to have time for this. He delves into that very issue when he talks about how it's not just, he doesn't simply want to pin all of the younger generation's growing mental health problems on technology. He also wants to link that and make it a parallel to what has been a trend he's seen for a long time. Some of us call it helicopter parenting, but a lot of, I think what he prefers to call it is the lack of free play-based childhoods and the over-concern, the hypervigilance of parents who, at the same time that these devices are drawing kids away from their communities, from other friends, from adults who might support them, from EYC, on Sunday night maybe. At the same time, a lot of parents, he notes, and this has been a trend since about the 80s, when people became increasingly concerned about sort of stranger danger and child abduction, which we all know now is not nearly as common as we were led to believe. But there's the pulling away from real, as he calls them, interactions, real life, because of technology, and that is being reinforced by a lot of parents' fear that sending their children out into the real world will result in something bad or dangerous happening. So those are sort of the two main points he wants to make in the book. Yes, I saw.
I think a couple of things. One, that this book has really caught fire for so many people that I think that sort of speaks to like how much these issues are really resonating with so many people on multiple generations. One thing to the point you just made, that a comment I read or heard him on a podcast say was that we have overprotected children in the real world and underprotected them in the digital world, and that's
Yes.
sort of, the very fundamental nature of this
Right.
issue, and that really I think encapsulates that point that you're making very well. That's sort of the problem, the sort of overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the digital world.
Yes, thank you. That was exactly the sentence I was searching for. Yeah, so could you say that? Well, so it's overprotection in the real world, and I'll tell you what he means by the real world in a minute, because he has some characteristics, and underprotection
Right.
in the virtual world. In other words, and he dates this back to, again, the 80s and 90s, when there was a lot of concern, Adam Walsh and lots of, the milk carton, the sense that people got that, gosh, there's a child on every street who's being abducted, so I shouldn't let my child ride his bike down to the convenience store to get bubble gum. That excuse me, went along with the rise of some gaming systems, and then later laptop computers, which you no longer had to sit in one place. You could take your laptop with you. And suddenly the digital world began to feel safer to many families than sending children out among strangers who might wish them harm. Of course, there are strangers who wish people harm on the internet, we know now, but that was not as prominent at the time. Yes, I saw. Hey, Leda.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you for tackling the topic. We have a 13-year-old. We're very strict parents. We still haven't given our son a phone. But the school gave him a laptop years before we were ready to give him any device. And he gets in trouble because he can't keep all the tabs, away from him. It's impossible. We have this constant force working against us. The kids don't have the opportunities to go places. We've embraced EYC and the Sunday school we send him. He thinks he's an atheist, but he's going, he's taking confirmation class. We're
He's
making
the
him
kind of atheist we love most.
Yes. So I just wanted to say thank you, because we're struggling with all the other parents our age.
Boy, I'll tell you, we're in it right there with you. I have one, our 14-year-old, how I wish I could put that smartphone back in the box, and an almost 12-year-old who has no desire for one, and we are working to keep her that way for as long as possible. The book also, incidentally, and I love, gosh, what great engagement, but I will say that the book, for those of you who have maybe children or are interested in gender differences, one of Haidt's big points is, and this is probably not a surprise, but that the way in which the digital world tends to challenge the mental health of girls is through social media and the bullying and so forth. And the digital world has discovered, the virtual world has discovered that the hook with boys is the video gaming and unfortunately also pornography. So those are the two. Yes, I saw a hand.
Yes, this resonates particularly with me as an author of speculative fiction. I recently read Mustafa Suleiman's The Coming Wave. He was the founder of the world's first AI company in London. He predicts that in 2034, we will be a civilization that's run entirely by AI. And so the notion that children are looking increasingly to social media and the internet for their self-esteem, I think is a major problem that we seriously need to address, because what it can lead to ultimately is a kind of solipsism that comes from investing all of your self-esteem
Yes.
in a digital medium, and your self-worth becomes equivalent to how many likes
Right.
and shares.
Exactly.
There's a couple of new films that have come out in the last couple of years. One is We're All Going to the World's Fair, which is about a young teenage girl who gets entangled in social media and eventually goes insane and commits suicide. So what you're talking about is reality, and I have to second Suleiman, who's saying if we want to prevent going into a civilization where it becomes impossible to even communicate with another human being except through the digital medium, then we're going to be in serious trouble.
We are,
So,
and
thank you.
this is one of the things, there were, NPR, I think this past week, did another one of its, and just in general, you hear lots of discouraging reports about the state of the American church, right? And I think the most recent one I heard was only 30% of Americans go to church on a given Sunday, which doesn't really worry me, because we all know in a parish like this, there's so many different ways to connect that are not necessarily on Sunday. And now being the mother of children myself, I no longer think that every Sunday attendance is sort of the high bar for showing whether you're committed to faith and whether you are helped by a relationship with God and others or not. But to me, Layla, you mentioned EYC. Church is a place where our kids and we can come and literally unplug for a while, right? And so that, to me, is a wonderful, wonderful value and thing, and commodity, as it were, to be able to offer the world now. I want to take just a minute, and I know there are other hands, but Haidt, we've talked about the real world versus the virtual world, and how much kids today and young adults need more immersion in the real world. And that's a phrase that we bat about that can take on different meanings. But what Haidt means by the real world, 4 things. He says the real world is characterized by interactions that are embodied. Okay, we're together, maybe not all the time, but the ground of our relationship is that we're people who get together. Those are what Haidt would call real world relationships. They're not just online. They're not just with AI. Sorry, I was thinking about, I'm aging myself. A big deal in Hattiesburg, Mississippi on a Saturday night was to go to the Western Sizzlin and eat a steak with A1 sauce. So, I hear some others. I can tell I'm among friends. But AI. So the real world is characterized by interactions that are embodied, synchronous, so the conversations are taking place at the same time. We're involved in give and take. They're not separated by hours because we're texting or taking place in the chat room. They tend to be primarily one-on-one conversations, interactions, or one to several. Situations like this excluded. And then they take place, this interests me the most perhaps, they take place within communities that have a high bar for entry and a high bar for exit. In other words, they are interactions and relationships that people value because they have worked to cultivate them over time. Think of your closest circle of friends, or maybe a foyer group that you've been part of here at the cathedral for a while. When an argument, disagreement comes up, as it invariably does, or in a relationship, a personal relationship, when disputes come up, you don't just block somebody because you have an investment built over time in that relationship, because you're going to see that person. You're not just an anonymous person in some chat room. I'm going to see Holly York again, so I'm not gonna diss her. I'm going to think about it before. And then also a high bar for exit. If you get upset about something, someone's going to call on you and say, Kathy, were you hurt at that last meeting? Or, Lucy, is there something going on? We care. We want to know. So those are the real world relationships and interactions. Virtual world, characterized, Haidt says, by interactions that are disembodied. People may never meet in person. In fact, sometimes the relationship may be with artificial intelligence, right? They involve lots of one-to-many communications. Again, the chat room sort of image is apropos. And they are asynchronous, usually. That is, hours or days may go on between the interactions and conversations. Someone may be stewing about that last remark you made in that online forum for days before they come back at you. And they occur within communities that have a low bar for entry and exit. That's the blocking piece, right? Somebody ticks you off. You're like, I don't have to see or hear from them ever again, and there's no cost. Nobody cares if I'm here or not. So that's the difference that Haidt wants to distinguish, way he wants to distinguish between real world interactions and virtual world interactions, and along with his central thesis that kids, that we have overprotected them in terms of interactions in the real world and underprotected them in their interactions in the virtual world. That's what he's talking about here. So let's see, what else? I wanted to read just a couple of quotes before we get back to we'll have time for a little bit more back and forth, but this was fascinating to me. In his introduction, Haidt actually draws upon Marcus Aurelius, among other people, to show that some of these issues are ancient ones, while they may be being battled out in a very postmodern way right now. The issue of sort of what we allow to occupy our attention and to captivate our hearts and minds is an ancient one. In fact, that just, I keep a part of a prayer on my desk and try to review it every day as I start work. And it's simple. It just says, turn my attention, Lord, to what is worthy. Focus my attention on what is worthy of my time and attention and my energy. And that's such a hard thing, I think, especially in this technological era. So in the 2nd century CE, Marcus Aurelius said, and Haidt gets into this talking about so much of our, not just children, but older, people of all ages, the way we can be negatively impacted by the predominance of technology and especially social media is by the amount of time we waste thinking about what others think about us, right? How many likes did I get for that last sermon? I thought that was pretty good, but there were only 5. Or I thought that was a pretty good deposition, or that was a really nice party I saw from so-and-so, and nobody liked the pictures. So in the 2nd century, Marcus Aurelius said, don't waste the rest of your time here worrying about other people unless it affects the common good. It will keep you from doing anything useful. You'll be too preoccupied with what so-and-so is doing and why, and what they're saying, and what they're thinking, and what they're up to, and all the other things that throw you off and keep you from focusing on your own mind. And then Epictetus in the 1st century said, if your body was turned over to just anyone, you would doubtless take exception. Why aren't you ashamed that you have made your mind vulnerable to anyone who happens to criticize you, so that it automatically becomes confused and upset? So here are these two ancient giants who are saying things that relate to a lot of the challenges that have been unleashed among us and our young people thanks to the technological explosion, and particularly to the social media explosion. But all is not lost, and I'll stop with this and then take any other questions or comments. And again, this is just an overview, and he's in the coming 15 or 16 chapters, he's going to break out all of these issues, including the issue of how the lack of free play, the lack of involvement in community groups really reinforces the harm that is caused to young people today by too much time in the virtual world. But he doesn't leave us without hope. He is going to go over in the book 4 suggested reforms for families and communities, and I love that piece, communities, who are wanting to provide a foundation for healthier children in the digital age. And true confession, as I've already said, I've already blown through a couple of these, my husband and I have with our first child. 1, no smartphones before high school, so before 9th grade. He's big on flip phones for necessary communications. No social media before age 16. A recent study suggested that almost 40% of children under the age of 13 have an Instagram account, even though it's not legal to do so, because there are no checks. All you have to do to start an Instagram account is to say, I'm such and such age, and there's no check. No parent has to come on or show any kind of proof of date. And the laws, incidentally, I've learned the laws regulating what constitutes an adult in the digital age and on social media were formed in 1998, the federal laws. Some states have tried to make some amendments to that, but it's, the Child Privacy Protection Act, some of you have heard of it, maybe COPA. That was designed and it was put into law in 1998, and it hasn't been looked at or revised since. So no social media before age 16. Phone-free schools, which we talked about, does seem to be becoming more of a trend. And then again, more unsupervised play and childhood independence. Like lately we've taken to allowing our 14-year-old, he has a friend who lives on the other side of the park, and they bike all over on their bikes every afternoon. And yeah, there's a part of me that thinks, I wouldn't have to worry about Sanders if he were home in the basement. But then I think, no, this is good for him. If you see him buying lunch at the $3 cafe on a Saturday, just, make sure everything's okay if you can for him. But anyway, questions, or I know we're about out of time, reflections or questions or observations or your own struggles. Yes.
I have 5 late teenage granddaughters, and at a big event, Christmas or mostly Thanksgiving, they'll be lined up just talking to each other on their cell phones. Mm-hmm. And it's just absolutely infuriating, but you have to just go along. And then I have a grandson that's a Navy fighter pilot. A different world. Because you know computers, of course he has to know you, but you don't have time for anything else. It's so technical, but it's frustrating, and it's frustrating to me. I've come to church this morning, and I was a little early, and I talked to 5 people, 2 of which I knew a little bit and a little bit better. Talked to them, and it's so hard for kids to do that because of the pressure of what you've just been talking about.
Yes.
And I'm so much the opposite. I'm just thankful that I can come here and see people that I know and that know me. It's a great feeling. And the kids I don't think they get that. I have one that really is able to do that. Come into a room and to start talking.
Right.
And it's so unbelievably fun to do that. And But
Yes, yes.
even for me, it's hard sometimes to do. You say, well, they're going to remember me, but at least that is a real world situation.
Right.
And what
Right.
you're talking about is just, it's just so scary. But at the same time, I would like to be better at manipulating this, because I live at Cross Creek. There's 900 units at Cross Creek, and they're slowly turning everything to no paper ballots. You know, you got to do everything. So we are all a party to what you're talking about.
We are, and I'm so glad you made that point because, and this is a point that Haidt makes in his introduction, that, unlike the anti-smoking campaign that adults can get with too. I mean, we've gotten to the point where in our culture where probably most of us don't want to be around cigarette smoke, so it's not just to tell youth to stay away from smoking is not as hard because we don't, but there are huge benefits for most adults from the digital world. I enjoy it. I love keeping up with old friends through social media. So that's a piece of it, yeah. And to be able to get around and along in our world. One last question that we need to, anybody else? Sure. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all. This has been fun. I've enjoyed it. And may the force be with us all. Let us hear how we can support you all at the cathedral. If you're interested in more, we'll be delving into the book chapter by chapter across the hall starting next week.